Get out, Mom. Maybe walking will help you understand why nobody wants you around anymore. The words cut through the Irish countryside like a knife as my daughter Emily slammed the rental car door. Her husband David gunned the engine, sending mud spraying from the tires as they disappeared down the narrow country road, leaving me standing alone with my suitcase beside what could barely be called a bus stop in the middle of County Cork. That was the moment I realized my own daughter had just abandoned me in a foreign country like I was nothing more than unwanted baggage. If you are watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now let me tell you exactly how a 72-year-old retired teacher from Ohio ended up stranded in rural Ireland with nothing but €38 in my wallet, and the devastating realization that my family had been planning this betrayal for months. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had called me with what she described as wonderful news. Mom, David's company is sending him to Dublin for a conference, and we thought it would be perfect if you joined us for a little vacation afterward. We could explore the countryside together, maybe trace some of our Irish roots. I should have been suspicious when she used the word perfect. Emily hadn't found anything about me perfect since she turned 16, but I was so desperate for time with my only child that I ignored every red flag. When was the last time Emily had invited me anywhere that did not involve babysitting her twin sons or lending her money for another one of her failed business ventures? So, I booked my flight, packed my best clothes, and even researched our family genealogy to make our trip more meaningful. The problem started the moment I met them at Dublin Airport. Emily took one look at my carefully chosen travel outfit and rolled her eyes so dramatically I thought they might fall out of her head. Really, Helen? You are going to dress like a retired librarian the entire time we are here? David smirked from behind his phone without even looking up. At least she will blend in with all the old castles and museums. I bit my tongue, determined not to let their rudeness destroy what I hoped would be a chance to rebuild our relationship. For 4 days, I followed them around Dublin like an unwanted third wheel. When they wanted to eat at expensive restaurants, I paid without complaint. When they wanted to shop for things they could not afford, I handed over my credit card with a smile. When they booked separate hotel rooms because everyone needs space, I agreed cheerfully even though it meant paying for an extra room I had not budgeted for. Yesterday morning, Emily announced we were taking a scenic drive through the Irish countryside. You will love it, Helen, she said, using my first name the way she always did when she was being condescending. Very authentic Irish experience. The drive had been beautiful, rolling green hills dotted with stone walls that looked like they had been there for centuries. Ancient Celtic ruins appeared around every bend, and sheep grazed peacefully in fields that stretched to the horizon. For a moment, sitting in the back seat of their rental car, I actually felt grateful to be included in their lives. That was before David turned around with that familiar expression of barely controlled irritation. Helen, can you please stop taking pictures of every cow and cottage we pass? You are making the whole car shake with your constant movement. I am documenting our trip, I said mildly. For my photo album. You know how I like to preserve memories. For what? Emily laughed at her own cruel joke. Your non-existent social media following. Nobody cares about your vacation pictures, Mom. I want to remember this time with both of you, I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. That was when Emily's expression changed, hardening into something cold and calculating. Our time together, right? She exchanged a look with David that made my stomach drop. Actually, Helen, there is something we need to discuss with you. And that was how I learned, somewhere between a 12th century abbey and this godforsaken village called Ballycross that probably had more sheep than people, that I was apparently a burden they could no longer carry. We have been patient with you for years, Emily had said, her voice rising with each word. But you are suffocating us. You are always there, always wanting to be included, always acting like we owe you something just because you raised me. Now here I stood, watching their taillights disappear around a bend in the road, with exactly €38 in my wallet, a dead phone battery, and the sinking realization that my own daughter had just abandoned me in a foreign country like an unwanted pet. The irony was not lost on me. This was the same daughter I had raised alone after her father died when Emily was only 8 years old. The daughter I had worked 2 jobs to put through college. The daughter I had supported through 3 failed businesses and a bankruptcy. The silence after their car disappeared was complete. No traffic, no voices. Just wind whistling through what looked like the remains of an old stone church and the distant bleating of sheep. I stood there for a full minute, suitcase handle gripped tight in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. My first thought was remarkably practical. I needed to find someone who could help me. My second thought was less helpful. What kind of mother raises a daughter capable of this level of cruelty? But standing there feeling sorry for myself was not going to get me back to civilization. So I picked up my suitcase and started walking toward what appeared to be the village center, though center was a generous term for what looked like maybe 4 stone buildings clustered around what might charitably be called a main street. The first building looked like it had not been occupied since the potato famine. The second appeared to be someone's house, but the windows were dark and there was no sign of life. The third building had a faded sign hanging crooked that read Ballycross Post Office, but when I tried the door, it was locked tight. Wonderful, I muttered, and immediately heard Emily's voice in my head, mocking my word choice. Even abandoned in the Irish countryside, I could not escape my daughter's criticism. That was when I heard it. The faint sound of music and conversation coming from somewhere up the street. Real sounds with actual people. Not just the ghostly echo of wind through ancient ruins. I followed the sound like a beacon, dragging my suitcase behind me over cobblestones that had probably been laid before America was even discovered. The sounds led me to a building that looked more alive than the others. A wooden sign swayed in the breeze. The Shamrock Inn and Public House. Through windows that could have used a good cleaning, I could see warm light and the silhouettes of people inside. I stood outside that door for longer than I cared to admit, trying to gather courage. What was I going to say? Excuse me, but my daughter just dumped me here like garbage and I need help. Sounded pathetic even in my head. But standing in the Irish wind was not going to improve my situation. So I pushed open that heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The conversation stopped immediately. Not gradually, not politely. It just died like someone had hit a mute button on the entire room. 5 or 6 people, all locals by the look of them, turned to stare at the American woman with the suitcase who had just interrupted their evening. Evening, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'm sorry to bother you, but I wonder if I might use your phone. I seemed to find myself in a difficult situation. A woman behind the bar, probably in her 50s with graying auburn hair and kind blue eyes, stepped forward. American, are you? Her accent was musical and warm. What brings you to Ballycross with a suitcase at this hour of the evening? That was when the absurdity of my situation hit me full force. I started laughing, not happy laughter but the slightly hysterical kind that bubbles up when your life becomes so ridiculous you cannot process it normally. My daughter, I managed between gasps, just left me here because apparently I am a burden she can no longer carry. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Then the woman behind the bar, whose name was Bridget as I learned later, said something that surprised me. Well then, she is a right fool, is she not? Come on now, sit yourself down and tell us what happened. For the next hour, over a cup of tea strong enough to wake the dead, I told my story to a group of Irish strangers who listened without judgment. They asked practical questions. Did I have money for accommodation? Could I get to Dublin on my own? Did I want them to call the police? That last question gave me pause. Did I want to call the police on my own daughter? The thought was tempting in the darkest corners of my mind. But what would that accomplish besides adding humiliation to abandonment? No police, I said finally. But I would appreciate directions to the nearest town with a hotel. That was when Bridget delivered news that made my situation go from bad to worse. The nearest proper hotel is in Cork City, about 50 kilometers south. There is no bus service from here, and a taxi would cost you more than you likely have. She was right. €38 would not cover a taxi to the next village, let alone a hotel room and meals while I figured out how to get home. However, Bridget continued, and I heard hope in her voice. We do have a room upstairs that we let out sometimes. Nothing fancy but clean and warm. €25 for the night. Breakfast included. I wanted to hug this woman. €25 I could manage, and it would give me time to think, to plan, to figure out how to get out of this mess with whatever dignity I had left. As I climbed those narrow stairs behind Bridget, suitcase bumping against the worn wooden banister, I caught a glimpse of myself in an old mirror hanging in the hallway. My silver hair was disheveled from the wind, my carefully planned outfit wrinkled from travel, and my eyes looked shell-shocked. But underneath the shock, something else was stirring. Something that felt surprisingly like determination. Emily thought she could dump me here and break me. She was about to learn that her mother was tougher than she remembered. The room above the Shamrock Inn was exactly as Bridget had described. Nothing fancy but clean and warm. A single bed with a thick wool blanket, a wash basin with running water, and a small window that looked out over the village square where I had been abandoned just hours earlier. I sat on that bed and made a mental list of everything I needed to do. Find a way to charge my phone, contact my bank to access more money, book transportation back to Dublin, and somehow get home to Ohio. Simple enough in theory. In practice, it felt overwhelming. The phone charging turned out to be easy enough. Bridget had a universal adapter behind the bar. While it powered up, she served me a dinner I had not ordered but desperately needed. Irish stew with fresh bread and a glass of red wine that loosened the knot in my chest. So, she said, settling into the chair across from me, what is your plan then? Survive until I can get home, I said honestly. And try to figure out how my relationship with my daughter became so broken that she could do something like this. Bridget nodded thoughtfully. Families are complicated things. I have got a daughter in London who thinks I am too old to run this place by myself. Keeps sending me brochures for retirement homes. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. As if 25 years of running an inn has suddenly made me incompetent overnight. Children, I said, raising my wine glass, apparently think they know what is best for us. Apparently, she agreed, clinking her glass against mine. That was when my phone finally came back to life, buzzing with a dozen missed calls and twice as many text messages. My heart jumped. Maybe Emily had realized what she had done. Maybe she was coming back. Maybe this nightmare was over. But when I scrolled through the messages, my hope curdled into something much darker. They were not from Emily at all. They were from my bank. Unusual account activity. Please confirm these transactions. Your debit card has been declined. My hand started shaking as I called the customer service number. After 10 minutes on hold and another 10 minutes of verification questions, I learned the truth that shattered what remained of my world. Emily had been making charges on my account all week. Hotel upgrades, expensive meals, shopping sprees, even a day trip to the cliffs of Moher that I had not been invited on. But the real shock came when I asked about my savings account balance. The account that should have had nearly $80,000 had less than $1,200. Madam, you authorized these transfers to your daughter's account 6 months ago, the customer service representative explained patiently. We have the signed documents in our files. Signed documents I had never seen, let alone signed. Emily had somehow gained access to my accounts and had been systematically draining them for months. The abandonment in Ireland was not just emotional cruelty. It was the final step in what had apparently been a long-term plan to steal everything I had. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. Bridget, who had been politely pretending not to listen, took one look at my face and poured me another glass of wine without saying a word. It is worse than I thought, I finally managed to say. And then, because keeping it inside felt like it might kill me, I told her everything. The unauthorized transfers, the forged documents, the systematic theft that had been going on for months without my knowledge. That is not just abandonment, Bridget said quietly when I finished. That is elder abuse. Financial abuse. It is a crime. It is my daughter, I said, as if that somehow made it less criminal. Makes it worse, not better, she replied firmly. Family members who do this know exactly how much damage they are causing. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the murmur of conversation from the locals still gathered around the fireplace downstairs. Finally, Bridget spoke again. How long can you stay here with what money you have left? I did the math in my head. Maybe a week if I am careful. Then we have a week to figure out how to get you back on your feet, she said matter-of-factly. You think I am going to let some American grandmother get swindled by her own child and not help? I may run a pub in the middle of nowhere, but I still have principles. The kindness from this stranger who owed me nothing was almost harder to bear than my daughter's betrayal. I had not cried since Emily's car disappeared, but suddenly the tears came hard and fast. Bridget handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently while I fell apart. When I finally composed myself, she was still sitting there with a determined expression I was beginning to recognize. Tomorrow, she said, we start fighting back. I looked at her through tear-blurred eyes. I do not even know where to begin. Lucky for you, Bridget smiled grimly. Do. My late husband used to say that when someone shows you who they really are, you better believe them. Your daughter has shown you exactly who she is. Now it is time to show her who you are. That night, lying in the narrow bed, listening to the Irish wind rattle the windows, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going home broken and defeated. I was going home stronger than I had ever been. Emily thought she had destroyed me. She had no idea what she had actually done. She had set me free. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, which seemed appropriate for my mood until Bridget appeared at my door with a cup of coffee strong enough to wake the dead and a smile that suggested she had been doing some serious thinking overnight. Get dressed, she announced. We have work to do. What kind of work? I asked, but she was already heading back downstairs, leaving me to wonder what this formidable Irish woman had planned. 20 minutes later, I found myself following Bridget down a muddy path behind the inn, through a gate I had not noticed yesterday, and toward what looked like an abandoned stone building about the size of a small barn. The structure was old, probably centuries old, with thick walls and narrow windows, but the roof looked solid, and the door was secured with a relatively modern lock. What is this place? I asked as Bridget produced a large iron key from her coat pocket. Used to be a grain storage warehouse, she said, working the lock. Back when this area was part of the farming route between Cork and Dublin. My husband's grandfather bought it in the 1960s, thinking he would convert it into something profitable. Never got around to it. The door swung open with a rusty creak, and Bridget stepped inside, gesturing for me to follow. What I saw took my breath away. The building was filled with furniture, artwork, china, books, and what appeared to be several decades' worth of collected antiques, all covered with dust sheets and organized in rough categories throughout the space. Celtic pottery sat next to Georgian writing desks. Oil paintings in ornate frames leaned against walls next to collections of vintage books with leather bindings. Good Lord, I breathed, pulling a dust sheet off what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden chest with brass fittings. How long has all this been here? Decades, Bridget said, walking deeper into the warehouse. People would bring things here when they moved, died, downsized. My husband never had the heart to turn anyone away, and he was always convinced he would get around to sorting through it all someday. After he died 3 years ago, I just locked the door and tried to forget about it. I ran my fingers along the surface of the wooden chest. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and despite the dust, I could see the rich grain of what looked like mahogany underneath. Bridget, some of this could be quite valuable. That is what I am hoping, she said, turning to face me with a business-like expression. 'Cause I have a proposition for you. I looked up from the chest, waiting. I need help cataloging and researching all this, she continued. There is probably enough here to fill an antique shop, but I do not know what is worth selling and what is worth keeping. You, on the other hand, spent 30 years as a high school history teacher. Did you not mention that last night? You know about historical artifacts and their significance. I had mentioned it during one of my rambling explanations of how I had ended up in Ireland. Before my marriage, before Emily, I had specialized in American and European history, with a particular interest in historical artifacts and their cultural significance. Felt like a lifetime ago. That was a long time ago, I said carefully. Skills like that do not expire, Bridget said firmly. And here is my offer. You help me sort through all this, research what we have got, maybe even help me set up some sort of selling operation, and I will split the profits with you 50-50. I stared at her. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you were abandoned by someone who should have protected you. I know you are smart enough to have managed historical research for 3 decades. I know you need money to get back on your feet. And I know I am sitting on what could be a small fortune if we do this right. I walked deeper into the warehouse, pulling back more dust sheets. A set of Waterford crystal, complete and without visible chips. A collection of first edition Irish literature that made my history teacher heart skip a beat. A painting that looked suspiciously like it might be by a minor Irish master from the 19th century. This could take months, I said. Good, Bridget replied. Because I have got plenty of time and now you do too. She was right. Emily's betrayal had inadvertently given me something I had not had in years. Complete freedom from family obligations. No grandchildren to babysit. No daughter to enable. No one expecting me to be the accommodating mother who never made waves. What about selling what we find? Yes. I do not know anything about the antique market here. Bridget smiled. That is where it gets interesting. My neighbor's cousin runs an auction house in Dublin. In stuff mostly. He has been after me for years to let him evaluate some of the pieces that have been sitting here. Never seemed worth the trouble before, but with two of us working on it. I picked up what appeared to be a small porcelain figurine, turning it over to look at the maker's mark on the bottom. My teaching training kicked in automatically, and I felt a familiar thrill of recognition. Bridget, I said slowly. This is a Belle Leek figurine from their early production period. If it is authentic and in good condition, it could be worth several €100. Her eyes widened. For that little thing. For that little thing. I set it down carefully and looked around the warehouse with new eyes. If this one small piece was valuable, and it had been chosen essentially at random from hundreds of items, we are going to need better lighting, I said, and realized I was already planning our attack on this treasure trove. Is that a yes? Then I thought about Emily, probably back in Dublin by now, assuming I was stranded and helpless. I thought about my depleted bank accounts and my uncertain future. Then I looked around this warehouse full of possibilities and felt something I had not experienced in months. Excitement. It is a yes, I said, but I want 60-40 split and I want it in writing. Bridget laughed and stuck out her hand. 60-40 and a proper contract. I knew I liked you. As we shook hands surrounded by decades of forgotten treasures, I could not help but smile. Emily thought she had left me with nothing. She had actually left me with the first real opportunity one had had in years to build something that belonged entirely to me. 3 weeks later I was covered in dust, my fingernails were permanently stained, and I had never been happier. Bridget and I had established a routine that worked like a well-oiled machine. Mornings spent carefully cataloging items in the warehouse, afternoons researching their history and value using the surprisingly good internet connection at the Shamrock Inn, and evenings planning our next moves. The Belle Leek figurine had been just the beginning. We had found a complete set of Georgian silver that was worth more than my car back home. A collection of Victorian jewelry that made my heart race when I looked up comparable pieces online. And yesterday, wrapped in what looked like old bed linens at the very back of the warehouse, we had discovered something that made both of us stop and stare. That is not just any painting, I told Bridget, carefully examining the canvas with the magnifying glass we had bought in Cork. Look at this brushwork. Look at the signature in the corner. The painting was small, maybe 18 inches by 12, but it was exquisite. An Irish landscape with a kind of detail and color saturation that spoke of true artistic skill. And in the bottom right corner, partially obscured by years of grime, was a signature that made my history teacher heart pound. P. Henry, Paul Henry, one of the most important Irish landscape painters of the early 20th century. If this was authentic, we were not looking at hundreds of euros. We were looking at thousands. How do we know for sure? Bridget had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We get it properly appraised, I had said, already making plans. But first, we need to have it professionally cleaned and examined. That was how we ended up making our first trip to Dublin since I had started my new life as an accidental antique dealer. Bridget drove us in her ancient Land Rover, the carefully wrapped painting secured in the back seat like precious cargo. The art authentication service Bridget's cousin had recommended operated out of a converted warehouse in Dublin's Old Town. The expert who examined our painting was a man about my age named Dr. Seamus O'Brien, with sharp eyes and gentle hands that spoke of decades of experience handling priceless artworks. "Where did you acquire this?" he asked as he carefully unwrapped the painting and set it on his examination table. "It has been in storage for decades," Bridget explained. "Part of an estate collection." Dr. O'Brien nodded and began his examination using tools and techniques I recognized from my teaching days when I had taken students to museum workshops. After what felt like hours, he finally looked up with an expression I could not quite read. "Well?" I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. "It is authentic," he said simply. "Paul Henry, probably painted around 1925. Subject matter is consistent with his work from that period, and the provenance makes sense. This area of Ireland was one of his favorite painting locations." Bridget and I exchanged glances. "And the value?" Bridget asked. "At auction, assuming proper documentation and provenance research, I would estimate between 12,000 and 18,000 euros. Actually gasped. 18,000 euros for one small painting that had been gathering dust in an Irish warehouse. If this was representative of what we might find in the rest of the collection. However, Dr. O'Brien continued, and my heart sank, "There is something else you should know." He pulled up a database on his computer screen and turned it toward us. I ran the painting through our record system, and there is a notation here from 1994. This piece was reported as part of a collection that went missing from the Murphy estate when the family lost their property to creditors. My stomach dropped. "Missing as in stolen?" "Not necessarily stolen," Dr. O'Brien said carefully. "More likely sold privately to settle debts, but without proper documentation of the sale. It is not uncommon with estate collections from that era. Families in financial trouble often sold pieces quietly to avoid public scrutiny. So we cannot sell it?" Bridget asked, the disappointment clear in her voice. "You can, but you would need to do more research first. Find documentation of how the piece came to be in your warehouse. Establish a clear chain of ownership. It is doable, but it takes time and potentially some legal assistance." As we drove back to Ballycross, the painting secured once again in the back seat, I found myself thinking not about the potential complications, but about the possibilities. If we had one authentic Paul Henry, what else might be hidden in that warehouse? And more importantly, I was discovering that I had skills I had forgotten I possessed. "You look like you are scheming," Bridget observed from the driver's seat. "I am thinking," I corrected, "about how to research the provenance of that painting, about what other treasures might be waiting for us, and about how your warehouse is about to become the most organized antique collection in Ireland." "Sounds like scheming to me," she said with a grin. That evening, as I sat in my little room above the pub with my laptop, researching estate sales and auction records from the 1990s, I caught myself smiling. For the first time since my husband died 3 years ago, I felt useful. More than useful. Felt necessary. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart jumped. Maybe Emily had finally realized what she had done. Maybe she was ready to apologize to make things right. But the message was not from Emily. It was from my sister Linda back in Ohio. "Have not heard from you since your Ireland trip. How are you doing? Call me." I looked at that message for a long time before typing back. "I am doing better than I have in years. I will call you soon with news." Because I was beginning to suspect that Emily's betrayal, painful as it had been, might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. I was about to find out just how right I was. The breakthrough came exactly 6 weeks after I had been abandoned in Ballycross. And it came from the most unexpected source imaginable. I was deep in research about Irish estate sales from the 1990s when Bridget knocked on my door with the expression I had learned meant she had news. "There is someone downstairs who wants to meet you," she said. "Says he knew your family." My family. I had not mentioned having any family connections to Ireland, mostly because I had not thought I had any. My grandparents had immigrated to Ohio from somewhere in Europe, but the family stories had always been vague, and with both parents long dead, I had never pursued the genealogy research. The man waiting in the pub's small sitting room was probably in his 80s, with white hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. He stood when I entered, extending a hand with a smile that seemed genuine. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I am Patrick Murphy. I believe we may be related." Murphy. The same name Dr. O'Brien had mentioned in connection with the missing painting. This could not be a coincidence. "Please sit," I said, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. "How did you know to find me here?" "Word travels fast in small Irish communities," he said with a chuckle. "Especially when an American woman starts poking around in old estate records and asking questions about missing artwork. My solicitor in Dublin mentioned that someone was researching the 1994 sale of my father's collection. My blood ran cold. If this man was connected to the Murphy estate, and if our painting had been part of that collection. "I see from your expression that you know what I am talking about," Patrick continued gently. "The Paul Henry landscape specifically." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Well, I have some news that might surprise you. That painting was never stolen, and it was never lost." He pulled a manila folder from his jacket and set it on the table between us. "It was given as a gift to your great-grandmother, Catherine Murphy O'Sullivan, in 1923, when she immigrated to America." The world tilted sideways. "My great-grandmother. Catherine Murphy," he said, opening the folder to reveal old documents and photographs. "My great-aunt. She married an American businessman named Thomas O'Sullivan who was visiting Ireland on business. When they left for America, my great-grandfather gave her several family pieces as a dowry, including the Paul Henry painting." I stared at the documents he was showing me. Immigration records, marriage certificates, and most importantly, a detailed inventory of items given to Catherine Murphy upon her marriage, signed and witnessed in 1923. "But how did it end up in the warehouse here?" I asked, my head spinning. Patrick smiled sadly. "Catherine came back to Ireland in 1951 after her husband died. She was in poor health and did not have any children yet. That came later with her second marriage. She stayed with our family for several months, but she was too ill to travel back to America with all her possessions. So, she left them in our care with instructions to hold them until she could return for them. And she never came back. She did actually, in 1954 with her new husband and a baby daughter, your grandmother. But by then she was happy in her new life in America, and she told my grandfather to keep the items or do with them as he saw fit. He stored them in various places around the property. I was having trouble processing this information. So the painting belonged to my family all along. More than that, Patrick said, pulling out another document. According to Irish inheritance law, and given that you are Catherine's direct descendant and the only surviving member of that family line, everything she left behind legally belongs to you. Everything. The painting is just the beginning. There were jewelry pieces, china, several other artworks, and some family documents that your great-grandmother thought might be of interest to her descendants someday. My hands were shaking as I reached for the inventory list. The items Patrick was describing were not just valuable. They represented a family history I had never known existed. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "You could have kept quiet and let me continue thinking the painting was stolen." Patrick's expression grew serious. "Because I am dying, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Cancer. And I have been researching our family genealogy, trying to tie up loose ends. When I discovered you existed and that you were here in Ireland, it seemed like providence. We spent the next 3 hours going through documents, photographs, and family stories. By the time Patrick left, I had legal documentation proving my ownership of not just the Paul Henry painting, but of a collection of Irish artifacts worth potentially hundreds of thousands of euros. That evening, Bridget and I sat in the pub after closing time, surrounded by the documents Patrick had left with me. "Well," she said finally, "this changes things considerably." I agreed. "The question is, what do we do now?" "Now," Bridget said with a grin, "we stop being small-time antique dealers and start being serious collectors. Because if you own a legitimate collection of this caliber, we are not talking about local auction houses anymore. We are talking about Sotheby's." I looked at the inventory list again, still hardly believing it was real. 6 weeks ago, Emily had abandoned me here, thinking she had left me with nothing. Instead, she had inadvertently led me to a family legacy I never knew existed. My phone buzzed with another text from Linda. "Helen, I am worried about you. Please call me." This time I picked up the phone and dialed her number immediately. "Linda," I said when she answered, "you are never going to believe what I have to tell you." Because I was about to become a very wealthy woman, and Emily was going to discover that abandoning me in Ireland had been the biggest mistake of her life. But first I had some serious business to conduct. The first auction at Sotheby's Dublin was scheduled for November 20th, exactly 4 months after Emily had dumped me on that Irish roadside. As I stood in the elegant auction house, watching wealthy collectors examine my great-grandmother's Paul Henry painting, I could not help but think about the irony of it all. The woman Emily had abandoned as a worthless burden was about to become rather wealthy. Lot 34, Paul Henry Irish Landscape, oil on canvas, circa 1925, the auctioneer announced. Bidding starts at €8,000. My heart hammered as hands went up around the room. It became 12. 12 became 16. 16 became 22. Bridget squeezed my arm when the bidding hit 25,000. But it was not over yet. €30,000, called a voice from the back of the room. 35,000 to the gentleman in the front row. 40,000. When the hammer finally fell at €52,000, I had to sit down. One small painting that had been gathering dust in an Irish warehouse had just sold for more money than I had made in 3 years of teaching. And it was just the beginning. Over the next 8 weeks, we sold 18 pieces from my inherited collection. The Georgian silver brought in €12,000. A set of Victorian jewelry fetched €28,000. A collection of rare Irish books from the 18th century sold for €35,000 to a private collector in London. By the end of January, my bank account showed a balance I had never dreamed possible. More importantly, I had discovered I had a genuine talent for this business. My teaching background, combined with Bridget's local knowledge and practical sense, had created something special. "We should make this permanent," Bridget said over dinner one evening in February. "I mean really permanent. Not just you helping me clear out the warehouse but a proper antique business." I looked around the Shamrock Inn, which had become more home to me than anywhere I had lived in years. "What did you have in mind?" "Partnership 50-50 like we agreed in the beginning. We convert part of the warehouse into a proper showroom. Maybe expand into estate sales and appraisals. I handle the local connections. You handle the research and authentication." It was exactly what I had been hoping she would suggest, but had not dared to bring up myself. "Murphy & O'Sullivan Antiquities has a nice ring to it," I said. Bridget grinned. That is when my phone rang. The number on the screen made my blood freeze. "Emily." I had not heard from my daughter since she had driven away and left me stranded. For 8 months, she had maintained complete radio silence, apparently content to let me disappear from her life entirely. Now suddenly she was calling. "Answer it," Bridget said quietly. "Time to find out what she wants." I hit the answer button with hands that were not quite steady. "Hello, Emily." Her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. "I have been trying to reach you for weeks." "Interesting." I checked my phone logs. No missed calls from her number. "Have you?" "Your old number was not working and nobody seemed to know where you were. I finally got this number from Aunt Linda." So Linda had given her my Irish phone number. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to apologize," she said. And for a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. "What David and I did, leaving you there, it was inexcusable." "Yes, it was. We were stressed and we had been fighting and we took it out on you in the worst possible way. I know that, and I know a phone call cannot fix what we did." I waited, saying nothing. 8 months of silence had taught me the power of letting other people fill uncomfortable pauses. "Are you still in Ireland?" she asked finally. Mom, please come home. Come back to Ohio. I know we have a lot to work through, but I miss you. David and I both miss you." The old Helen might have melted at those words. The old Helen had spent years craving exactly this kind of acknowledgement from her daughter. But the new Helen, the one who had built a successful business and a new life, recognized the manipulation in her daughter's voice. Why now, Emily? After 8 months of complete silence, why are you suddenly calling? Then does it matter why? I'm trying to make things right. Matters to me. Another pause. Longer this time. Fine. I saw something online, a news article about auction sales in Dublin. There was a picture of you with some antique dealer, and it mentioned that you had sold some family collection for a lot of money. And there it was. Emily had not called because she missed me or felt guilty about abandoning me. She had called because she had learned I had money again. I see, I said quietly. Look, I know what you are thinking, but that is not why I am calling. I mean, yes, I saw the article, but I would have called anyway. I have been planning to call for weeks. Have you? Mom, please. Can we just try to fix this? I could come to Ireland or you could come home and we could work things out like adults. I looked across the table at Bridget, who was listening to every word with an expression of barely contained fury. Then I looked out the window at the Irish countryside that had become my sanctuary, my new beginning, my real home. I am not coming back to Ohio, Emily. But you have to. Your life is there. Your friends, your house. You made me sell my house, remember? And my life is here now. The silence stretched out so long I wondered if she had hung up. Finally, she spoke again, and this time the little girl voice was completely gone, replaced by something harder. Fine, then I will come to you. Emily arrived in Ireland 3 weeks later, and she did not come alone. She brought David, of course, but she also brought her 2 children, my grandsons, Jake and Connor, ages 10 and 14. It was a masterful manipulation, and despite everything, I had to admire the strategy. Hard to stay angry at someone when they are standing next to your grandchildren whom you had not seen in 9 months. They found me at the warehouse, which Bridget and I had converted into a proper showroom and appraisal center. The transformation had been dramatic. What had once been a dusty storage space was now an elegant display area with proper lighting, climate control, and carefully arranged exhibits of the finest pieces from local estate sales. I was photographing a Georgian tea service when I heard the rental car pull up outside. Through the window, I watched Emily climb out of the driver's seat, looking around Ballycross with the same disdainful expression she had worn the day she abandoned me. But when Jake and Connor emerged from the back seat, my heart clenched painfully. They had grown so much in 9 months. Jake had lost another tooth, and Connor had shot up at least 4 inches. Grandma Helen, Jake shrieked, running toward the warehouse door. I barely had time to set down my camera before he launched himself into my arms. Connor followed more slowly with the carefully controlled enthusiasm of a 14-year-old boy trying to look cool, but I could see the genuine happiness in his eyes. I missed you so much, Jake whispered against my shoulder. I missed you too, sweetheart, I said, and meant it completely. Emily and David approached more cautiously, taking in the warehouse's transformation with obvious surprise. This is not what I expected, Emily said finally. What did you expect? She gestured vaguely around the showroom. I do not know, something smaller, I suppose. More rustic. Bridget chose that moment to emerge from the office area, carrying a folder of appraisal documents and wearing the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. You must be Helen's daughter, she said, her Irish accent somehow thicker than usual. I am Bridget Murphy, her business partner. Emily's eyes widened slightly at the business partner description, and I could practically see her recalculating whatever approach she had planned to take. Business partner? David asked, looking around with newfound interest. What kind of business? Antiques, estate sales, appraisals, I said simply. We have been quite successful. Successful enough to afford this renovation, Emily observed, and I heard the old familiar tone, the one that implied I was being wastefully extravagant. The renovation paid for itself. Bridget interjected smoothly. When you are dealing with high-value items, presentation matters. Our clients expect a certain level of professionalism. Clients? David asked, and I could see the dollar signs practically lighting up in his eyes. That was when Jake tugged on my sleeve. Grandma, can you show us around? This place looks like a museum. Does it not? I said, grateful for the distraction. Would you like to see some of the treasures we have discovered? For the next hour, I gave my grandchildren the same tour I gave to serious collectors and potential clients. Jake was fascinated by a collection of Celtic artifacts, while Connor was drawn to a display of medieval weapons and armor pieces. "Are these real?" he asked, examining a 15th-century Irish sword. "Completely authentic," I confirmed. "That particular piece belonged to an Irish clan chieftain. We are selling it next month to a collector in London." "For how much?" Emily asked, appearing beside us. €15,000, I said casually, watching her eyes widen. €15,000 for one old sword. For a documented piece of Irish history with provenance dating back 500 years, I corrected. Emily walked around the showroom with increasing amazement, stopping to examine price tags and documentation. I could see her doing mental calculations, adding up the value of everything on display. "Mom," she said finally, "I had no idea. This is really something." "Thank you. Mean it. You have built something impressive here." The old Helen would have glowed under such praise from her daughter. The new Helen recognized a setup when she heard one. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked quietly, drawing her away from where the children were exploring. "Can I not just be proud of my mother?" "You can, but that is not why you are here." She looked around the showroom again, and when she turned back to me, the mask had slipped slightly. "Okay, fine. Yes, I am impressed by what you have accomplished. But I am also worried about you." "Worried about what?" "About you being taken advantage of. About this woman," she gestured toward Bridget, who was showing Connor how to properly handle the antique sword, "using you for your knowledge and connections." I almost laughed. "Emily, Bridget saved me. When you abandoned me here, she gave me shelter, friendship, and opportunity. Everything I have now started because of her kindness. But are you sure she has your best interests at heart? Are you sure she is not just using you?" The irony was breathtaking. My daughter, who had systematically drained my bank accounts and then abandoned me in a foreign country, was worried that someone might be using me. "What exactly are you suggesting?" asked. Emily glanced around to make sure the children were not listening, then leaned closer. "I think you should come home with us tonight. Pack up whatever is yours and come back to Ohio where your family can look out for you." "My family?" "Me, David, the kids. We made a terrible mistake, Mom. But we want to make it right. We want to take care of you properly this time." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the audacity. "Take care of me? You are 72 years old, living in a foreign country with strangers. What happens if you get sick? What happens when you are too old to work? Who is going to look after you then?" "I will manage," I said dryly. "But you do not have to manage alone. That is what family is for." And despite everything I knew about my daughter, despite all the evidence of her selfishness and cruelty, some small part of me wanted to believe her. Some small part of me still craved her love and approval. Maybe that is why I made the mistake I was about to make. "I will think about it," I said. That evening, I agreed to have dinner with Emily and her family at the small hotel where they were staying in Cork. It was the first time in 9 months that we had sat around a table together, and I found myself watching my daughter carefully, looking for signs of the woman who had abandoned me. But Emily was charming that night. She asked thoughtful questions about my business, praised the photographs I showed her of our recent auction successes, and even apologized again, more thoroughly this time. "I have been seeing a therapist," she said over dessert while the children played quietly with their phones, "about anger management and family relationships. She helped me understand that what I did to you was not just cruel, it was abusive." The word hung in the air between us. Emily had never acknowledged that her behavior might qualify as abuse. I agreed quietly. "I know, and I know that saying sorry is not enough. I have to show you that I have changed, that I am working to become the daughter you deserve." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I love you. I should have said that more often over the years. I should have shown it better, but I do love you, and I want us to be a real family again." The old Helen would have melted completely. Even the new Helen felt a dangerous softening around the edges. "What does that look like?" I asked. "Being a real family again. Means we make time for each other. Means I stop taking you for granted. It means the kids get to know their grandmother properly. Connor looked up from his phone. Are you coming home with us, Grandma Helen? The question was innocent, but it felt loaded with expectation. I looked around the table at these people who were my only family, who had traveled across an ocean to find me, who were saying all the things I had longed to hear for years. I do not know, sweetheart, I said honestly. We could visit you here sometimes too, Jake suggested. This place is actually pretty cool. Emily smiled at her son's words. We could do that. Maybe we could even help with your business somehow. David is good with marketing and social media, are you not, David? David nodded enthusiastically. I could set up a website for you, help you reach more customers online. This antique business has real potential, Helen. With the right marketing strategy, you could probably expand beyond Ireland. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. A real reconciliation with my daughter, grandchildren who knew me and wanted to spend time with me, a family business that bridged the ocean between us. It was seductive. It was everything I had wanted. It was also probably too good to be true. But that night, back in my room above the Shamrock Inn, I found myself seriously considering Emily's offer to come home. Maybe people really could change. Maybe my daughter had genuinely learned from her mistakes. Maybe the cruelty I had experienced had been an aberration, not her true character. I was still debating with myself when I heard voices outside my window. The hotel where Emily was staying was only a few hundred meters away, and sound carried clearly across the quiet village at night. I recognized David's voice first, then Emily's. They were standing outside the hotel, apparently having what sounded like a serious conversation. I could not make out individual words, but I could hear the tone. Urgent, possibly argumentative. Curious, I opened my window slightly and leaned closer. I told you this was a waste of time, David was saying. She is not going to just hand over the business. She might, Emily replied. Did you see how she reacted when Jake asked about coming home? She wants to believe we have changed. And if she does not believe it, then we move to Plan B. I felt my blood turn to ice. Plan B. I still think Plan B is too risky, David said. What if she finds out? She will not find out. And even if she does, what is she going to do about it? She is 72 years old and living in a foreign country. Who is going to believe her over us? Their voices were getting fainter as they moved toward the hotel entrance, but I caught Emily's final words. One way or another, David, we are not leaving Ireland empty-handed. I closed the window and sat on my bed in the darkness, my heart pounding. Emily had not come to Ireland to reconcile with me. She had come to steal from me again. The therapist, the apologies, the talk of being a real family. It was all an elaborate con game designed to get me to trust her long enough for her to figure out how to take what I had built. I should have been devastated. The old Helen would have been crushed by this final confirmation of her daughter's true nature. Instead, I found myself getting angry. Not sad, not hurt. Furious. Emily had stolen my savings, abandoned me in a foreign country. And now she was planning to steal my business too. She thought I was too old and too naive to protect myself. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. I picked up my phone and called Bridget. It is late, she said when she answered. Everything all right? No, I said grimly. But it is about to be. We need to talk. The trap was elegant in its simplicity, and it was entirely Bridget's idea. Over coffee the next morning, after I had told her what I had overheard, she had smiled with a kind of cold satisfaction that reminded me why I would never want to cross her. So, they think they can con you out of your business, she had said. Well then, let us give them something to con you out of. The plan was this. I would pretend to be convinced by Emily's Reconciliation Act. I would agree to return to Ohio with them. But first, I would need to liquidate my share of the business and transfer the money to American accounts. This would require Emily's help since she understood American banking better than I did. Of course, the accounts I would ask her to help me set up would be fake. The money I would appear to transfer would be non-existent, and the liquidation of valuable antiques would actually be a carefully orchestrated removal of our least valuable inventory to a secure storage location. The beautiful part, Bridget explained, is that they will think they are stealing from you when really they will be stealing nothing. and in the process they will confess to exactly what they are planning to do. And you are sure this will work? Helen, I have been dealing with cons and schemers my entire life. Trust me, greed makes people stupid. She was right. Emily took the bait immediately when I called her that afternoon. I have been thinking about what you said. I told her about coming home, about being a real family again. And I could hear the excitement in her voice. Think you are right. I think I should come back to Ohio with you. The silence stretched out for several seconds, and I could practically hear her trying not to sound too eager. Really? You mean that? I do, but it is complicated, Emily. I cannot just walk away from the business overnight. There are legal obligations, inventory to deal with, money to transfer. Course, she said quickly. We understand that. How long do you think it would take to wrap things up? Few weeks, maybe a month. And I would need help with some of the financial aspects. The banking systems are different here, and I want to make sure I do not lose money in the transfer process. David and I could help with that, she offered immediately. David is really good with finance and international banking. I will bet he is, I thought. That would be wonderful, I said aloud. Could you extend your trip? I know it is a lot to ask, but I could really use the support. Absolutely. We will change our flights. This is more important. Over the next week, Emily and David became my constant companions. They helped me liquidate inventory. Actually, they helped us move our least valuable pieces into storage while we told them we were selling everything. They assisted with closing bank accounts. Actually, they helped us open several fake accounts with minimal balances while we told them we were consolidating my Irish earnings. And through it all, Emily played the role of the devoted daughter perfectly. She was attentive, helpful, and seemingly genuine in her desire to make amends. If I had not overheard that conversation outside the hotel, I might actually have believed her. The breakthrough came on day 9 of their extended visit. David had offered to help me transfer a large sum, supposedly €250,000, from the sale of our most valuable pieces to an American account that he would help me set up. The thing is, Helen, he explained, international transfers of this size can be tricky. Sometimes it is easier to route the money through multiple accounts to avoid taxation issues and currency exchange fees. Multiple accounts. Just temporarily. We set up a holding account, transfer the money there first, then move it to your permanent American account once we are back in Ohio. And you would have access to this holding account. Yes. Just to facilitate the transfers, Emily added quickly. It would still be your money, of course. We would just be helping you manage the technical aspects. I nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. You are both so much better with this kind of thing than I am. Exactly, David said. And I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Emily. We just want to make sure you do not get taken advantage of by banks or currency exchange services. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That evening, I met with Bridget and our solicitor, Patrick's nephew James, to finalize the details of our trap. Everything was ready. The fake accounts, the false transfer confirmations, even fabricated documentation showing the fictional sale of our most valuable inventory. Are you sure about this? James asked. Once they attempt to access those accounts, they will be committing fraud. Criminal fraud. I'm sure, I said. My daughter has stolen from me twice now. I will not give her the opportunity for a third time. And if they actually go through with it, if they try to take the money and disappear, then we call the police and press charges. Bridget nodded approvingly. They made their choice when they decided to con you. Now they get to live with the consequences. The next morning I told Emily and David that everything was ready for the transfers. Are you excited? Emily asked as we walked to the bank. About coming home, starting fresh. I looked at my daughter. This woman who had given me such joy as a child, such pain as an adult, and felt something surprisingly like pity. Yes, I said honestly. I'm excited about starting fresh. Just not in the way she imagined. The call came at 7:15 a.m., 4 days after Emily and David had returned to Ohio with what they believed was access to my €250,000. I was having breakfast with Bridget when my phone rang, showing Emily's number. Her voice was shaking. We need to talk. Good morning, Emily. How are you settling back in? There is a problem with the bank accounts, the ones David set up for your money transfer. What kind of problem? They are frozen. The bank says there was suspicious activity, and they have locked everything down pending an investigation. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. How strange. What do they mean by suspicious activity? I do not know. David has been on the phone with them for hours, but they will not tell us anything. They just keep saying there is an ongoing investigation. Well, I suppose that is concerning. Have you contacted the police? Silence. The police. If there has been suspicious activity involving my money, should we not report it to the authorities? I do not think that is necessary. These things usually resolve themselves. Do they? How convenient that you know so much about banking irregularities, Emily. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Harder, more desperate. I think there might have been some kind of mistake in the transfer process. Could you call your bank in Ireland and ask them to resend the money? Maybe to a different account. Could I? I set down my coffee cup and smiled at Bridget, who was listening to every word with obvious satisfaction. And which account would you like me to send it to this time? David has another account we could use temporarily, just until we figure out what went wrong with the first one. How helpful of David to have so many accounts available. Mom, please. We are trying to help you here. Are you? That is interesting. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you are trying to steal from me. Again. The silence this time was absolute. I do not know what you mean, Emily said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I mean that there was number 250000 euros, Emily. I mean that the accounts David set up were fake, monitored by police financial crimes investigators. I mean that every conversation you had with those banks was actually with undercover officers gathering evidence. I could hear Emily's breathing quicken on the other end of the line. That is impossible. We saw the documentation. We saw the transfer confirmations. You saw fabricated documents designed to catch you in exactly the kind of fraud you were planning. We were not planning fraud. We were helping you. Were you? Then why did I overhear you and David outside your hotel discussing Plan B, and how you were not leaving Ireland empty-handed? Complete silence. The truth is, Emily, you never came to Ireland to reconcile with me. You came because you learned I had money and you wanted to steal it, just like you stole my savings last year. The apologies, the therapy story, the promises about being a real family. It was all lies designed to manipulate me into trusting you long enough for you to rob me blind. That is not true. But her voice was weak now, defeated. Is it not? Then why do you not call the police yourself? Report this banking irregularity to the authorities and let them sort it out. No response. Thought not. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Irish countryside that had become my true home. Emily, I gave you every opportunity to be a real daughter to me. I forgave your cruelty, your theft, your abandonment. I was even willing to believe you had changed, that you genuinely wanted to make amends. I did want that. I do want that. No, you do not. You want my money. You have always only wanted my money. And now you get neither. Mom, please. Let us talk about this reasonably. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. Hey. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. There is no we, Emily. There is me living my life in Ireland with people who genuinely care about me. And there is you sitting in Ohio trying to figure out how to explain to your husband why your latest con did not work. It was not a con. Then what was it? Silence. Here is what is going to happen, I continued. You're going to leave me alone. Completely alone. No more phone calls. No more manipulation. No more attempts to insert yourself into my life for financial gain. In exchange, I will not press charges for attempted fraud. You cannot press charges. We did not actually take any money. No, but you tried to. And you did take money last year. Money you stole from my accounts using forged documents. The statute of limitations has not run out on that, Emily. I could hear her crying now, but it did not move me the way it once would have. If you contact me again, I said firmly, if you show up in Ireland again, if you try any more schemes involving me or my business, I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of both American and Irish law. Are we clear? Mom, you cannot just cut me out of your life. I am your daughter. No, I said quietly. You were my daughter. Now you are just someone who shares my DNA and thinks that entitles her to my money." I hung up the phone and turned to Bridget, who was watching me with an expression of pride. "Well," she asked. "It is over," I said, and felt a weight I did not even realize I had been carrying lift off my shoulders. "It is finally over." 8 months later, Murphy and O'Sullivan Antiquities was featured in a major article about successful Irish antique dealers. The photograph accompanying the article showed Bridget and me standing in our showroom, surrounded by beautiful pieces we had discovered and carefully researched. I was 73 in the article. I was wearing a designer suit I had bought with my own money. I was standing in a business I had helped build, and I was genuinely happy for the first time in decades. Emily never called again. I heard through Linda that she and David had divorced, apparently over financial problems that I suspected were related to their failed attempt to steal from me. I did not feel bad about it. My phone still gets messages sometimes from people who have heard my story. Women mostly who have been financially abused by their own children, who have been made to feel like burdens instead of treasured family members. I always respond the same way. It is never too late to start over, and you are stronger than you think you are. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Emily thought she was abandoning me when she left me on that Irish roadside. Actually, she was setting me free. Thanks for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.